When an airplane is decommissioned, it's usually sewn up for scrap, but some airplanes end their lives not under the grinders but in other places. For example, at the bottom of the sea, in a quarry near a busy road, in a hot desert, or on cold black sand. It looks fascinating and frightening. This is Infinity, and in this episode I'll show you 10 creepiest abandoned planes. Many sunken ships and boats can be found at the bottom of the seas and oceans, but planes are much less common there. Here is one such case. At the bottom of the Red Sea, near Jordan, there is an old Lockheed Martin TriStar plane with 3 engines. The sight's impressive and frightening at the same time. The large plane, buried in the sand, is mesmerizing and makes you ask the question, what happened? Maybe this line aircraft crashed and couldn't land properly. Or did someone hit it and it fell into the water? Fortunately, neither of those things happened. In fact, this plane was made abandoned on purpose. It was submerged at the bottom of the sea in 2019 to become an artificial reef for marine life, all for the good of nature. The plane, which was first registered back in 1980, rests at a depth of 49 to 92 feet. The tail of the aircraft is submerged the deepest, and the pilot's cockpit is above the rest of the line aircraft. It's already gradually fulfilling its purpose and becoming home to marine life, but it seems that it's not the fish that visit the plane more often, but the underwater photographers, divers, and shipwreck explorers who are constantly diving to this Lockheed. Boeing in Bali. If you travel through the southern part of Indonesian Bali, at one point you may stumble upon a mysterious abandoned plane. It stands just 164 feet from the road in a small limestone quarry. It looks strange and unusual because, as a rule, abandoned objects are found somewhere in the middle of nowhere, not right by the road. What's even stranger is that the plane has no identifying marks or any attributes of belonging to some airline. It's not even known where this plane came from. Presumably, it appeared at the quarry in 2014, but even the local residents don't understand who could drag it here. Because the plane obviously didn't land, it was brought here intentionally. However, according to one version, some Australian owner bought the plane and brought it here in small pieces, and then the plane was assembled on site. In any case, the mysterious plane has long been a local sightsee. People regularly flock to the place to gawk at the unusual aircraft. However, this can only be done from afar. The plane stands on private property, which is carefully guarded. But maybe soon it'll be possible to go down to the plane without problems and even enter it, because it's planned to turn it into a restaurant. Let's get back to some more serious stuff. This time it's very serious because it's about a plane that went missing during World War II. In 1942, during the North African campaign, British Air Force Sergeant Dennis Copping was flying the P-40 Kitty Hawk plane. It's a distinctive aircraft which prowl looks like the menacing snout of a shark. During the flight, the sergeant went off course and didn't return to base, so he had to make a hard and forced landing in the Sahara Desert. After hitting the ground, the plane was badly damaged, so the sergeant had to make camp and wait for help. There was no one in the middle of nowhere, so Copping soon passed away. The plane and the sergeant were reportedly missing, and it wasn't until a few years ago that the truth came out when an oil industrialist accidentally stumbled upon the plane while he was exploring remote areas of the desert in western Egypt. It was determined from the plane's tail number that it belonged to Copping. The remains of the sergeant himself were never found. After such a tense story about a hot desert, it's worth cooling off. And for that, I suggest diving into the ocean again. Besides that Lockheed off the coast of Jordan, there's a lot more to be found. For example, the Chance Vought F-4U Corsair. It was a single-seater fighter of World War II. It was found off the coast of Honolulu, Hawaii. It belonged to Lieutenant Holden of the U.S. Army. In 1945, the lieutenant was on a training mission when suddenly his Corsair malfunctioned. The plane began to crack, indicating a fuel leak. Holden had to crash land the fighter on the water. Corsair started to sink during the ditching, but the pilot survived. Since then, the Corsair rests at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and, like the Jordanian plane in the Red Sea, attracts many divers. Getting to the aircraft is not very difficult. It rests at a depth of about 98 feet. One sunken or destroyed plane is mesmerizing and epic, But what about a whole graveyard of abandoned planes? There are quite a few of them in the world, and they're mostly military aircraft graveyards. But I would like to show you an aircraft graveyard in Thailand. You can find it in Bangkok. The cemetery's small but intriguing. There's a Boeing 747 and two smaller planes called MD-82. Tourists regularly visit the planes. Parts of the aircraft's skin and oxygen masks are scattered around the planes. This is practically all that's left of the aircraft equipment because even the piping and power cables have long since been scrapped. This oppressive atmosphere makes it seem as if we're looking at a crash site of these planes. But there's no crash. The aircraft graveyard belongs to a local businessman and is technically private property, but for a modest sum of money, any tourist will be allowed inside. One of the creepiest abandoned planes is in Iceland. On a black beach in the Solheim-Ásmundur wasteland, there's a fuselage of the U.S. Navy Douglas aircraft, and unlike those Thai planes, it has a more frightening history. In November 1973, the plane was flown by a U.S. Navy pilot. The plane ran out of fuel and crashed in Iceland. The good news is that the crew survived. The plane couldn't be recovered, so it was decided to leave it on the black sand. It's been resting there for almost 50 years. The fuselage remained untouched for a long time until one day it was accidentally discovered by a farmer. Since then, the U.S. Navy Douglas plane has been a local landmark. Tourists regularly visit the plane, which used to be accessible by car. Now you have to walk, but it's probably worth it. If you want to visit this plane, keep in mind that it's not safe. Several tourists have died of hypothermia here, so you should be prepared for very cold weather. On April 4, 1943, 25 American heavy four-engine bombers took off to bomb Naples, Italy. All planes of the group returned safely from the mission, except for the Lady Be Good, bomber number 64. Searches at sea and on the coast yielded nothing. Lady Be Good disappeared without a trace. Many planes fell into the sea, so the pilots were listed as World War II casualties, and the story of Lady Be Good was considered over. However, in 1958, during the flight in the Libyan desert, the plane was found. A year later, an expedition was dispatched to the crash site, which found the Lady Be Good bomber with the number of 64. There were no pilots or their parachutes on the abandoned plane. Water and food supplies were still intact. This indicated that the crew had ejected. Surprisingly, without the crew, the plane made a fairly successful landing on its own. It didn't collapse as badly as it could have during the fall. The crew members were found a year later. Unfortunately, they were all dead. The mummified pilots were lying 81 miles away from Lady Be Good. A diary of one of the pilots was also found, in which he described the events before and after the crash. Now the story was over, and a few years later, what was left of the plane was moved to the Libyan military base in Tobruk for storage. Lady Be Good is still there today. In various deserts, you can find a bunch of other abandoned planes with their own interesting stories. The next find was discovered in Iraq. When the U.S. Army entered Iraq in 2003, soldiers found shells of chemical weapons made before 1991, as well as factories for their production. But a far more unusual find was an entire fleet of advanced MiG and Su-25 fighters lying in the Iraqi desert. Many of these fighters have been constructed in the 1970s and 1980s, but were not broken and even partially functioned. Why then were they lying idle in the desert? The U.S. military assumed that the abandoned planes had never taken off during the war, as the Iraqi commanders understood the futility of fighting the vastly superior U.S. Air Force. During the war, not a single plane took off from Iraqi airfields. Still remember the Douglas lying on the black beach in Iceland? At least one more creepy abandoned Douglas can be found. I'm talking about this plane, which lies on the border of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The abandoned, forgotten, and damaged plane is part of Zeljava Air Base. It was once the largest underground airbase and airfield in the former Yugoslavia, but the base is now abandoned. The plane is the main attraction of Zeljava Air Base. Since no one is guarding it, one can get as close to it as possible. Many people get into this abandoned aircraft and also leave graffiti on the fuselage. Someone turns airplanes into establishments, and someone turns them into houses. Sounds strange, but there is at least one such case. An American engineer from Oregon named Bruce Campbell bought an abandoned and decommissioned Boeing passenger plane about 15 years ago and turned it into his dream home. The plane is hidden in the woods and not easy to find, the better for Bruce, who lives in peace. To get to the house plane, one has to climb a stairway at the tail end. It's surrounded by a neat lawn, which the engineer regularly mows with a lawnmower. Everything as if it's happening in an ordinary property in front of the country house. Bruce rebuilt the plane really cool. He got rid of the seats and transformed the plane's interior into a bedroom, living room, and home office. He cooks his meals in the former crew kitchen. Campbell had to modernize the bathroom and build a shower into it. House plane has a full plumbing and electrical system. There's even fancy LED lighting and a transparent floor. Looks pretty good to me. Would you like to live in a house like this? That's all, guys. Which of the abandoned planes impressed you the most? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you later.